My name is Lucia Alves. After many decades in the entertainment industry, I have decided to create, in partnership with my husband, Cine Tribe. This is a haven and an alternative to Hollywood. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Very well, and you?
Just fine, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to just make it, thank you, Matt. I'm going to put it into a gallery so we both see each other fine. And I'm going to make you high here so I can hear you properly. So thank you, Kevin, for joining us, for all you do, for all your work and discoveries and exposures and all that stuff that you're doing. My name is Lucia Alves. I hope you have understood a little bit what we are doing as well. We are aiming to create an alternative to Hollywood and to enlighten people to understand that what they've been told is not really what's going on through media and also other things. So I'm not going to go into a bio thing because I first know that you don't like it and it's not necessary, because if someone is listening to this, they already know who you are. But I would like to understand a few things that you've been working on. And so I put on some questions and I'd like to address that to you. But just please, if you want to say something before we start, go ahead.
No, I'm fine. Let's just jump right in. That's fine.
Great. So Kevin, it is easy to get caught for years, simply by uncovering the darkness that has been hidden by occultists to us. And so how to shift from learning about what have been hidden and being shocked about it, how to shift from that to actually changing the system, creating a different future. How do you feel we can do that?
Well, I've had to learn how to do that over the years, kind of by trial and error, also through a lot of personal suffering and loss. And I often say to people, it's important that we learn from our experiences. We learn from our pain because it's our best teacher. And, first thing I realized is that the thing that we were, when we discovered these horrible crimes, especially against children and the innocent, is that it can be psychologically overwhelming. We can just collapse from it and just either deny it all or feel totally incapacitated, like we can't do anything about it. And I find people who are in a way too aware, too educated, get immobilized that way because they don't know, they don't have anything they can really do about it. They feel overwhelmed. So often I know from my own life, after I lost my children and they were taken from me, one of the ways I dealt with my own personal grief was simply being among other people who were struggling with similar things. The last thing you want to do is sit in a room somewhere with this knowledge or with your own suffering. You need to get out there, be working with people, and have a sense that you can achieve something. And so we began to do that, even if it was holding circles where we were talking about our experiences, documenting these stories. We began to hold public actions, educational events, protests about anything, just to defend the innocent, get the stories out about these horrible crimes. We found the more we did that, the more we learned. And the more support came to us, more people were coming from everywhere saying, yeah, the same thing happened to me. And you began to get a sense we were building a movement. I remember one Native woman once said to me, I used to be a victim, now I'm a threat. Great. And that's kind of the mentality, is that we can turn it back on whatever happens to us, we can actually turn it to our advantage.
Yes.
But the other thing on that, though, that's important is over time I learned that we ourselves are part of the thing that caused this. We're seeing the blowback happen on us now with all these COVID measures. I often say to people, mandatory vaccinations is nothing new. If you're an Aboriginal person in Canada and the United States as well, it's been the law for over 120 years that if you're living on a reservation, you cannot refuse vaccinations or medical treatment, or you go to jail. I remember as a clergyman, Native women would come to me all the time saying they've just grabbed my children and stuck a needle in her arm and we can't do anything about it, we'll go to jail. So those crimes that were inflicted, with our tax money and our name, we're now experiencing. And I guess that's part of the law of return in nature. If you do something, it'll come back, but it's also an opportunity to learn finally that, it creates a great basis of unity for us to realize now we're all threatened in this way. So that's kind of part of what I've learned over the years.
Beautiful. Thank you. So do you have any thoughts in regard to collectivism and individualism and their significance today, knowing that, we are up against collectivism really? So what is the significance of these words today?
Well, I know, the American, the official motto for America is e pluribus unum, which means for many, one. And that's kind of like the corporate or the empire's idea that everybody, it becomes one identity. That's really the idea behind genocide, right? That you don't have the right to remain who you are. But the law of nature is the opposite. From one source comes many, comes infinite diversity, right? And so there's that source that unites all of us. And yet when we see the direction going on in the world, it's like there's only two options left. There's this huge kind of corporate machine that's trying to absorb all of us. And, that's what the word we traditionally in Canada, they used for genocide was assimilation. We assimilated the Native people. Well, that means actually the meaning of the word is to eat somebody, to absorb them, to eat them, to take them in. And that's what this machine is doing to us. The only alternative is to reestablish human autonomy and sovereignty. And that's, many people are getting that, like this idea of the common law and sovereign republic and everything is spreading up everywhere. It's like that 100th monkey phenomenon. So I get, I was just on a Zoom call with people in Poland who said, yeah, we've never heard of the common law, but this makes sense. We all have that innate understanding, right? It's like it's born in us that. So I think that those are definitely the two roads. We're at that crossroads right now, and we have to make that conscious choice to be sovereign in our own minds first.
Yes. So I'm starting this podcast called Reclaim Your Mind, actually. And for that same reason, because I have some background in the Vedic knowledge and, the whole mantra meditation and the link with God, which also you have a great background with this, is to actually, you have to control your mind. And if somebody else is controlling your mind with propaganda, for example, then you don't even have your mind to work with. So that's why I call this Reclaim Your Mind. And Badria, our friend, said, Anna, he said, reclaim your mind. It has to be providence. So what can we do? Who are in the system but can see, for example, the people who are in the system, but they can see it's wrong. What can they do, and what would you encourage them to do when you are in the system, but you want to get out and something is wrong, finally?
Well, it's difficult because people have families, they have bills to pay. And I know that just because people go along with the system doesn't mean they support it. It's that they don't see an alternative. And the advantage of what we do with the common law assemblies in the Republic is that in Canada and elsewhere, this applies, it's a universal, common law is universal. And so anyone can establish anywhere. But the thing that we do within the assemblies is to say, okay, we know you don't like this system. Here's an alternative. When 12 people come together and sign a charter, they're a governing assembly. They can pass their own laws. They can enforce those laws in their community to protect their children and others. So giving people a model that they can actually start governing themselves, but not simply as an individual, but as that family of sovereign beings. And really, it was the original philosophy of America. When you look at the attitude of the founding fathers and the people who preceded them, is there is no higher authority than people's own conscience.
Sure.
And America was the first time in history that a nation of sovereign men and women governed themselves. It wasn't a pope or a king over them. They were, the law which they themselves created was, the final
Was the king.
authority. Yeah, you're right. And like, that's why they say in America, the Constitution, the government cannot make a law that violates these fundamental liberties, because the Constitution is the highest law. So,
Sure.
that's a very liberating idea still. And I think that it's a way to say to people, you can go back to that original model and belong to that. And
yes, that's great. That's
Yeah.
wonderful. So, how to introduce personalism, individualism, empathy to generations that never knew these things very deeply, because it is being programmed. They have been programmed into this everything, everything is all one with the new age movement. Is now we are all one, and everything is, for the greater good. So how to introduce this idea to these youngsters?
Well, I think it's understood innately once people have the time and the space to just reflect and be with themselves. And I often say that being in nature, being around animals, being around children, it brings out our nature very, very automatically, right? But people's minds and senses are so filled with all these distractions that they don't know any different, and it's kind of discouraging. I remember saying to somebody when I was a youth in the 1970s, if they had proposed everyone putting these, I don't even call them masks, I call them, they're just like muzzles over people.
Yes.
If anyone had have even suggested we do that, they would have been laughed. We would have said, we're not doing that, And yet now the youth, because of programming, because of the technology and the iPads and everything, they don't know how to employ that part of the brain which is being suppressed, which is about innate feelings, intuition, imagination. I read an interview done with a New York psychologist several years ago, and he said he went into a class of kids in kindergarten in New York City, and he asked them about daydreaming. What do they think of when they daydream? And they didn't know. And even the older, he went to grade 7 class after, and they didn't know what he meant when he said to daydream, to imagine, to think outside that box in a different part of your mind. It's being drilled out of people. And the first job really is for us to reclaim not only our own minds, but our children, and creating alternative curriculums and homeschooling and things where we just pull them out of this stultified system. So that's definitely a big step. We have to focus on recovering our children, which is ironic because for 20 years I've been working with Native families that have struggled to do that, exactly that. And so now that genocide, we realize we have a lot to learn from them in terms of how you do that, right?
Yeah. Some of these natives, my great grandmother is native Brazilian, and there's a whole history behind her being removed from her own tribe, which was annihilated. And they couldn't speak their language, actually, or they would be shot on the head. So they killed the language immediately first, which is actually, I think, what they do. They kill the culture first, and then they enslave you. And so this is before, but now they don't even have to do that anymore, as they have already these devices that remove your creativity and everything that you naturally as a kid you have, like daydreaming, like you say. So education is a great part of it. After, if they cannot force on you, then they just school you. Until we have these institutions back to give enlightenment to the people instead of just schooling them into being zombies, really, we don't have a chance. So you couldn't comment on that, or maybe you could. What do you think about that?
Senator power, I think we have to create our own, because the existing institutions like the courts, the governments, they're corrupt and fallen. They are controlled by the corporatocracy, which is a global corporate machine. They're answerable to them. It goes back a long way, of course, to when the Rockefeller and Trust set up the General Education Board in America in the early 20th century. And Rockefeller made this infamous remark, "I want workers who work, not think."
Right.
So they rescheduled all the education away from traditional liberal arts and all of that towards technical trades, utilitarian thinking. Everything has to have a practical outcome, the whole bit, right?
Right.
So the system is so inundated with that, especially that existing technology, that we need to go back to very simple ways of, from the grassroots, like we do in our courts and assemblies, reestablish human relationships.
Human connection.
That's how to build new institutions on the ground, horizontally, not looking to a vertical corporate system of hierarchy, right, to get this done, right?
Sure. So I've read some about your tribunal and this court case, and I found that very fascinating. What happened to, first I would like to say, what is the church RCMP back ops campaign? What would that be, very briefly?
Well, it started, Black Ops, of course, as people know, is like state and other powers have ways of treading. Well, I call it the 3Ds. You deny, discredit, and distract. And you ultimately destroy the targeted individuals, but you do that by so blackening their name that nobody wants to have anything to do with them. And they've tried to do that constantly for the last almost 25 years with me, but my advantage was that I had so much evidence. There were so many people coming forward, and I didn't give up. I didn't stop.
Sure.
And it was harder to kill me, because all that does with a white guy like me is you create a martyr.
Right.
You know, like my Aboriginal friends, a lot of them have been killed off, and who are involved in this stuff, and nobody notices, of course, but although I do, I talk about them all the time, but it's easier to do that in our culture. But with me, you have to destroy the reputation. It's character assassination, and it's more effective than physically killing somebody. Sure. So they've tried that, but it doesn't really work over the long run, right?
Right. So you said church RCMP. Who exactly are these guys, for example?
The Royal Canadian Mounted Police in Canada, the RCMP, they're a state police. They help set up these death camps, residential schools, and we named them in the indictments in all of our court cases. And they helped bury the children who died. They destroyed grave sites when we began to identify them, all of that stuff. And the church, the United Church that I was a minister in, but of course it's the Catholic Church, the Anglican, all of these churches were implicated in deliberate genocide. Yeah.
So the United Nations, so I understand that the United Nations did get to understand what was going on. And you say that they refused to act when presented with evidence and conviction that the Canadian government and churches have committed a crime. So how does the UN refuses to act on such a thing? Because a lot of people, they think, okay, maybe governments are corrupt, but the UN, oh my God, thank God for the UN. So explain to us, how did they refuse to, and why do you think that's so?
Well, a lot of that evidence is at my site, murderbydecree.com, and the whole history is there. And that's all the evidence that we've accumulated over years about all of this. But what happened briefly was the first tribunal ever held about genocide in Canada, I helped sponsor in the summer of 1998 in Vancouver. And it was, we invited a group called IRAM, which was an NGO at the United Nations. And there were 20 Aboriginal elders and international observers who came to Vancouver in June 98, heard all this evidence, and Rudy James, who is the delegate from IRAM, made a recommendation to Mary Robinson, who was the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the time in Geneva. And he said all of the definitions of genocide in the UN Convention are met here. Like all of these things we've documented from eyewitnesses and other material that they went on in Canada till 1996 in these institutions. So we need a war crimes tribunal. Mary Robinson never responded. We found out later that the Canadian government had exerted pressure at the UN because Canada has a lot of influence traditionally at the UN and at those levels of power. And it just never happened. Although there were individuals within the UN, including Aboriginal delegates from the Mayan people and others, who did raise their own, they were called denuncias. They were like denouncing the Canadian government and the churches for these crimes. And that eventually did allow more of this to come out and force the government to issue some kind of statement and a quote apology in 2008 about it. And it led to, the court cases we did in Europe. So we weren't stopped, but it was definitely, if you operate at that level of institutional power, it's pretty easy for governments to to do that. And one of the reasons is, I remember one of the delegates to the UN told me, none of the major powers want to raise this stuff because they all did it. All the major European powers did this to Indigenous people all over the world. They don't want to open this whole issue of genocide. They'll implicate themselves. So that's part of the problem as well, right?
Yes, they did that exactly in Brazil. It was atrocious. So how to overcome feelings of not being able to make a difference? It's like, just very briefly, you already explained that a little bit, but how the feeling is something that is very inherent in people when they see something that is so big, it's so atrocious, it's everywhere. So as you already experienced that, how can we quickly become active and deal with those feelings? Mourning, maybe? I don't know.
Well, it comes over time if again, you don't give up. I know that when we tell people about how we forced Pope Benedict to resign and how he's still hiding out in the Vatican 12 years later because he knows he could face arrest from these standing arrest warrants because of his own role in these crimes against children. You know, people find that hard to believe because they said, well, you were just a few people. Why would that force the Pope to step down? Well, it happened because the Spanish government had gotten involved and said to the Vatican he might face arrest, the Pope Benedict, if he came to Spain, based on what they had seen in our docket of evidence, right? So I like to talk about my story and all this to show that people have tremendous power if they've come into their own understanding of themselves and they don't give up. That creates an energy which the system, no matter how powerful, has to respond to. And the other thing, though, is that not all of us are made or supposed to be doing this. Like, there's a few of us whose purpose it is. We're incarnated here to do this, and fortunately, sometimes we find that out through our own struggles and everything, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that I was sent here to do this. That one of the reasons I was born was to do that. And once you're aware of that, then that gives you great power. But it isn't meant for everybody, frankly. And we don't need a lot of people to bring about these changes. But I encourage everyone to do that all the time. But we also need to know that this is, to some degree, just a matter of, I don't know what you want to call it, purpose, fate.
Purpose or calling, yes.
Calling, yeah, that's also a big thing, you know.
Yeah, I feel very strong about that as well with what we are doing here with Cine Tribe and, creating this alternative proposition to Hollywood, which is incredible. I've been there 3 times and I am, trained actor and a producer. My husband is a director, and it's the same exact thing in big numbers. Children are being abused, adults, blackmail, you name it, and people fall for it because they like the fame, the money. So what we do, as you were saying, is that when you have a conviction and your purpose and your innate divine power given by God, not government, thank God, then you can actually make a difference in a bigger scale, because then you can enlighten others and we can operate in a different platform. Would that be a different platform? Because it can be fearful, even for people that have the spiritual warrior mentality, and they have this calling. They might be afraid. How would you tell them to be connected in a way? Well,
it's happened to me a lot, actually. In my moments of fear, I remember what I do is I go, and this was taught to me by somebody I met in Mexico once in Chiapas. He was a defrocked Catholic priest who was working with the native people there. And there was a price on his head, and he was eventually killed. But the point is, when he was speaking to me, he said, every time I get afraid, I go to the refugee camp and I go to the poorest child and I look at her and I realize that she can't escape. So why should I?
Right.
And she gives me courage to go another day. And that's exactly what I did. I would always go to the people who were suffering worse than me and said, they have the strength to stand up and speak about this stuff when they know it could cost them their life. I'm inspired by that courage, and I can take from that just as they take from what I do. So it's that sense of that energy that we share, right? That holding each other up and learning from the most, innocent, the most oppressed among us, that how to do that, right?
That is true community, really.
Yeah.
True
Yeah.
community. So would you have any other solution for ways to counter this these systematic problems of humanity right now? Do you have any other ideas that you would like to plant in the hearts of other human beings that might be listening to this and say, look, maybe this and that and the other, if somebody can pick that seed up and go with it, what would you share?
Well, it's about soul. It's about not surrendering that spark of divinity within all of us that knows the truth and refuses to stop, that isn't afraid, that is seeking truth at all cost, and is willing to give up everything for the sake of the least of our people, right? The ones who will die tomorrow if we don't take that action. And people have a natural response, kind of that animal response. It's, what's going to happen to me if I do this? Are we allowed to do this? Am I going to get into trouble? People think about that all the time. Mm-hmm. But then I often say to people, you go through an experience and then you realize there's something more important than that. The question is, what's going to happen to people if I don't do this?
Right.
If we don't act, our situation is going to be worse than if we just try and fail. But to do nothing is to make things worse now. And I think more people realize that. That's kind of a practical fact. But the other is just simply, the thing that got me through as well is the love I have for my own children and for the children I was encountering and others. And I realized I can't sacrifice that. It doesn't matter what my fear is. That's not something I can do. So it really is just taking your conscience seriously and letting that guide you. I think It's that simple.
Sorry. So I would say that for you to have this conviction, you need to have empathy for another human being, which is the basis of community. It's not a dog-eat-dog world, actually. That is something that has been planted in our minds. And it's more, like, what can you do for other in service? And you serving other will save your life, because with what's happening right now with this COVID craziness, and we are in November 2020, is the implementation of medical Gestapo. Mm-hmm. So it's a lot more people are waking up to the fact that, well, if we don't stand up now, it's going to be, there is such a thing as too late. Please share just very briefly, because we are going to run out of time, the feeling you have, because you have spent time with native people, indigenous people in many countries. We are in Mexico right now, in the Yucatan area, in the Mayan. Not only the feeling that you have with these native, powerful human beings, but also very briefly, how did they rewrite the history books to make most people believe that they were the dangerous ones? I'd like to hear very briefly about that.
Well, it started, of course, the slaughter. I mean, first you kill off 90% of people, and the first to die here on the west coast of Canada, in the smallpox and tuberculosis that was deliberately spread, the first to die are the elders with the knowledge, the traditional oral knowledge and traditions, and the young. Mm-hmm. So there isn't a lot left of the culture after that. And, we carry it at a cellular level, and yet a lot of that is wiped out. And so there's no basis on which people can then resist a lot, right? Mm. And so the younger Native people I work with are very much understanding that they need to recover their own traditions,
right.
The pre-Holocaust tradition, right?
Right.
That they carry, and they put a lot of emphasis on that, which is really important. The most important factor too right now in terms of resisting this genocide that's coming down on all of us is stubbornness, the ability to say, no, we will not. And there's no substitute for that within ourselves. Say, I will not comply with any of this, because if enough people do that, it doesn't exist. So we learn that all the time. And so that's not something that can be taught. That comes from that inner resolve. And our ancestors are almost struggled the way they did so that we could be prepared at this moment for this. It's really the most important battle the human race has ever faced. It's extinction. We face extinction.
Sure.
and they stand with us all the time. You know, I feel them very strongly, always
The
have, but
ancestors.
even more now.
The ancestors. Yes. The killing of culture that has been, you know, going on for a long time, it got into a global scale with the globalists, and then now not only they removed many countries that didn't agree with the plan, but it's going into massive dictatorship, communism. So the sovereignty of a human being, how powerful that is, and how come so many believe that they don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
It's is it in the soul level, you said? So I want to rephrase this. It's in the soul level. So the atheistic scientific agenda, that is like the cherry on the cake that will eliminate any understanding that actually you are, you know, you are the soul and the body is a vehicle, and then you are incredibly powerful when you stand, you know, alone even, or in a group. So tell us a little bit about the soul and the understanding that this power, it's just beyond us, and we can actually tune into it and become a beam of light.
I think it's an innate experience we have. There's no word really or language for the divine. Mm-hmm. And that's why I remember when I asked Native people to speak from my pulpit, one of the elders said, well, we can't speak about what's sacred. You can't. You can only live it. You can only witness to it. Let it manifest in your body. I feel that every time I'm out in nature, and I just sit there, and it's also obvious. The harmony, the oneness, the peace, it's also just vibrating in me and around me that I wouldn't want to debase it by trying to preach about it, you know, or write a book about it or something, right? That puts it into a little box, and that's not meant to be, right? So I think we know that intuitively, so there isn't a lot to be said. There's just a lot to be shown. Being, not doing or saying. That said, it's important to at least guide people in that direction, sometimes with words. So I think that's really important.
The possibility to conceive the idea, because the scientific, you know, atheistic mentality is so engraved in the youngsters that it's for them sometimes it's difficult. They know something is not right, but they can't pin down. They want proof for everything, and you can't prove something that you experience in your heart and that you already are, right? Like you say, you can't make like an equation about it.
There was some movie I saw, and a very spiritual man was talking to a scientist, and the scientist kept saying, well, show me the proof of God. And finally the spiritual man said, did you love your father? Because he knew his father had just died. And he said, well, of course I did. Prove it.
Right.
Like, how do you prove? You can't. It's just a reality, right?
Interesting. Yeah. So the encouragement would be that we can empower each other in a global scale to just broadcast the message that there's more to the eye. That, I don't know the saying, but that there's more than what we see with our own eyes, and that we should explore that part as well, and that is most liberating.
It's a source of, for me, it's a source of a strength I have, which has allowed me to endure this against every odd, blacklisting, poverty, loss of everything. I mean, attack, and yet I'm still there untouched. That part of me is untouched. Yeah. And that's not from here. It's from a different place. It's fortunately, right? It's not this, we are interdimensional beings, but I didn't know that until I experienced it from a lot of this.
Yes.
You know,
what I find, because we are filmmakers, you know, I find like you are like one of the true superhumans in a way. Like, you know, they want superheroes, you know, we could name you, because, you know, there's so many faking it and pretending to have all these powers. And I think that when we really go down to our basic, you know, divine connection, we can do things that, you know, would really, you know, people would be amazed. So I think empowering education on the right way, and then creating these groups like you're creating. So please tell us where we find you, what is the best way to get a hold of you, like a last moment.
Okay. Well, my email is angelfire101@protonmail.com. My website with a lot of my books, the radio show I do on Sunday, all that is murderbydecree.com. And that has the whole history, all the evidence, the research I've done over the years on these crimes of genocide and other things, crimes of church and state. And finally, the Republic, Common Law Republic we're setting up in Canada is Republic of Kanata.ca. Now, Kanata is spelled Kanata, and it's actually a Eastern Six Nations Indigenous word. It means the village where the people sit as one.
Beautiful.
And that Kanata, Republic of Kanata.ca, that's our vision of our new.
Yeah,
our
I think
world.
everybody should make their own flag too. So tell me about the flag, the 3 stars. What do they mean?
The 3 stars in the flag represent the English, the French, and the Indigenous original founding nations. And there's 2 blue lines above and below, and that's called the Truro Wampum Treaty, which was first signed in the 1600s between the English, the French, and the Iroquois Haudenosaunee people in the East. Mm-hmm. And it said we will travel down the river side by side in our boats, but not one over the other, but as equals, as friends sharing the land. Wow. And the traditional Native people still hold to that. My people abrogated it, but we're going back to that vision to establish that equality on the land with each other. So that's the vision.
So if you would see yourself 20 years from now, how long do you think, how long would you like to see this playing out? Is it a long drawn 50-year, timeline, or do you see things turning a little bit faster than that? Well, how do you?
I'm not sure. Part of me feels that it's going to collapse very quickly. It can't be sustained. That's why the measures they're taking are so desperate. The state and this global elite, they're acting desperately, like they have a timeline. They've got to get it done by a certain time. That shows, Sun Tzu in The Art of War would say, that shows weakness and fear. They know they're losing, and that's what prompts them to act that way. So I'm confident that this awakening, it's almost a race between the awakening of humanity. Well, can it occur before they use even more destructive methods? Sure. Or it could drag out over many years, kind of a protracted struggle. I don't know. It's hard to say, but I do know that we're on the right track. We don't have any other thing but to do what we're doing, and that's to reclaim ourselves and hold on to our humanity and what's true.
And then spread the word. So the day of our passing, let's say we will all have to pass, we will have to leave these bodies. How do you feel that the humans should feel on that day? Because I know the native at my great grandmother's tribe, they would actually leave their village and they would go die alone because they had done their duty, they have done everything, and they would just meditate and become one with God, and they would depart. So is that the best way to leave in a legacy or not? It doesn't matter. Everybody will leave a legacy, whatever they do. But how do you see that? How do you see the human being be more graceful in their passing? What would you encourage there?
Well, I've experienced that because I've been at deathbeds and when people die, and I experienced that. I feel it in their passing. It's so beautiful. It's as beautiful as when I helped deliver my 2 daughters when they were born, right? It's the same energy of this opening to eternity, and where all things are clear and answered, right? There is no division or separateness. At the same time, in my tradition, among the Irish and Scottish people, they would hold a big party. They call it an Irish wake, right? But what it is, they would get together in the community and help the soul make the transition. So they would sing, they would tell tales about the person's life, trying to sum up their life to allow their passage, right? So it's that community kind of honoring you know, is beautiful. I
That
kind of
life.
way that, yeah. So it's both, I think. I think both are really important, right?
Very important. The Vedic knowledge, they do the same. It's a big party. They actually, they play music and they dance while the person is getting ready, and it's amongst company. So it's a passage. Like when we have the gate to come in, we have a gate out, and we don't know when that's coming. So doing all we can every day, being ready in a way to like make a transition in the company of loved ones is the best, of course. And if not, if you're very independent and from a culture that, you know, will like to just be alone, it's also, we should respect all that. So respecting all cultures. So with the global idea, since the world became so small now, I think what the glue for all this, and I just want to end with that and your little comment on that, is the glue is really knowing that actually what they applied, the colonizers, we call in Brazil the invaders, but the colonizers, what they did to the indigenous people worldwide, they are applying to everybody else. This is what I understood. So it is time now to actually understand from that level and say, okay, no to this, no to that, and then we can actually level up at least the territory. So when a person says no, even mentally, do you think that is already a big help? Do you think in the heart already refusing, even if it's not physically, do you think that we can start there and then move forward?
Because when you say no to this horrible violent machine that we're in, you're saying yes. You're saying yes to something else.
Right.
It isn't simply an act of resistance, it's actually an act of creation. So ultimately, you don't fight a system, you step out of it, withdraw your energy, and create something new. And then it will collapse because it rests totally on our compliance and obedience and our energy. It's parasitic on us. It's like an entity feeding off our attention and our energy. So we just withdraw from it. Right? That
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
That's exactly our motto for Cine Tribe and the movies we are creating. Kevin, it's been a pleasure, and I'm so grateful. And we would like to be in touch. And if we can help you in any way,
thank you.
We are creating something, you know, that we can discuss eventually more. But I know you've got to go, so I am grateful, and may God bless you every day, forever.
And you, thank you.
Thank
and
you.
thank you. I hope we'll talk again sometime. We can do it more of it.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.